This is a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell here in Washington, and we are coming on the air as special counsel Jack Smith is delivering remarks on the indictment of former President Donald Trump any moment from now. Just over an hour and a half ago, the 38-count indictment was unsealed, 37 of them specifically targeting Mr. Trump. And the accusations made in this indictment are stunning. They allege that the National Archives repeatedly demanded that the former president turn over classified documents beginning in May of 2021. The charges against the former president include willful retention of national defense information, conspiracy to obstruct justice, withholding a document or record, corruptly concealing a document or record, and concealing a document in a federal investigation, scheme to conceal, and false statements and representations.
Okay, so this just went down. A federal judge has effectively ripped the lid off a set of previously sealed evidence tied directly to President Trump's legal cases, and the reaction in Washington has been instant chaos. Within less than a day of those files being unsealed, members of Congress erupted, openly demanding accountability at the highest level, and not just hearings or oversight. We're talking about lawmakers calling for Trump's arrest. Yes, arrest. Not impeachment language, not slow investigations, straight up demands for criminal consequences. What makes this even more explosive is that it's not coming from just one party. You've got Democrats pushing hard and Republicans, shockingly, not rushing to shut it down. When both sides are reacting like this, something has clearly shifted. This isn't routine political noise. This isn't the usual partisan theater. This is Washington entering territory. It almost never enters, and whatever comes next is not going to be business as usual. There are many truths you need to know that the mainstream media hides from the general public. But first, watch this statement from Jack Smith.
Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with felony violations of our national security laws, as well as participating in a conspiracy to obstruct justice. This indictment was voted by a grand jury of citizens in the Southern District of Florida, and I invite everyone to read it in full to understand the scope and the gravity of the crimes charged. The men and women of the United States intelligence community and our armed forces dedicate their lives to protecting our nation and its people. Our laws that protect national defense information are critical to the safety and security of the United States, and they must be enforced. Violations of those laws put our country at risk. Adherence to the rule of law is a bedrock principle of the Department of Justice.
Look, so I know what you're thinking. Another Trump scandal, another legal case, another round of political theater. But this one is different for one reason that changes everything. This is about sealed files. Evidence that was locked away behind courtroom doors, material that was supposed to stay hidden for a reason, and now a federal judge has just blown that lock wide open. And here's the part that should make you pay attention immediately. Within about 24 hours of this evidence getting unsealed, members of Congress started talking about accountability in the most direct language possible. Not just investigations, not just hearings, not just long drawn-out committee fights. People started using the word arrest. And what is even crazier is that the reaction was not purely partisan. You had Democrats demanding consequences, and you had Republicans reacting too, which almost never happens unless something is seriously wrong. This is not normal Washington drama. This is not the usual cycle where everyone yells for a week and then moves on. When Congress moves this fast, it is because the material is genuinely shocking. When you get even a hint of bipartisan urgency, it is because different people looked at the same files and came to the same conclusion that this is serious, this is urgent, and it cannot be handled with the usual slow-motion playbook. Now, the timeline matters here because this did not come out of nowhere. Back in January 2025, the Department of Justice started filing paperwork tied to releasing Special Counsel Jack Smith's classified documents report to Congress. Democrats were already pushing for full disclosure. They wanted everything in the open. They wanted the American people to see what investigators found, what prosecutors believed, and what the evidence actually supported. And then, instead of a controlled and carefully managed release, a judge apparently unsealed evidence in a way that detonated the whole situation. It is like the DOJ was trying to open the door slowly, and the court kicked the entire door off the hinges. The controlled process turned into uncontrolled exposure. And once that happens, you change the politics instantly. You change the incentives. You change what lawmakers can ignore, and you change how long anyone can hide behind procedure and delay. Because once sealed evidence becomes public, the pressure is immediate. Professor Jamie Raskin went on X and made it clear that the Department of Justice cannot just sit there doing nothing if there is actual criminality in front of them. He was not offering a casual opinion. He was putting the DOJ on notice that they cannot slow walk this, they cannot pretend this is normal, and they cannot hide behind the usual legal excuses if the evidence shows what people think it shows. When someone like that speaks publicly, it is not just noise, it is a warning that Congress is going to push. And then you have Senator Lisa Murkowski, a Republican, saying sealed files cannot hide corruption and the American people deserve the truth no matter how high it goes. Think about that for a second. In modern Washington, party loyalty usually overrides everything. Republicans do not usually rush to validate accountability narratives about a Republican president. So when a Republican breaks ranks and talks like that, it is a signal that whatever is in those files is not easy to dismiss. It suggests the evidence is serious enough to crack the normal partisan reflex. So we're looking at a perfect storm. Sealed evidence that was meant to stay hidden. A federal judge unsealing it anyway. Democrats demanding action. A Republican voice saying truth matters more than party protection. And Congress as a whole reacting like they just saw something they cannot ignore. And, well, I couldn't miss the chance to ask you to subscribe to our channel. If you want to receive breaking news and stay informed about what the mainstream media doesn't tell you, this is the right place. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. It helps us a lot to keep bringing high-quality content to you. Thank you, and continuing. Now let us talk about what this is actually about, because a lot of people are misunderstanding the story already. They think this is just about documents, just about papers sitting at Mar-a-Lago that should not have been there. But the moment sealed files are opened, it becomes about far more than the existence of documents. It becomes about what was done with them, why they were kept, what investigators concluded about intent, what prosecutors believed about motive, and whether the conduct crossed the legal line. At this point, the basic fact that classified documents were found at Mar-a-Lago is not really in dispute. Investigators found them. Courts confirmed they were found. The real questions have always been what happened around that fact. What was done with those materials? Why were they there? Was there an effort to obstruct? Was there intent? Was there a state of mind that matters legally? And were there actions that could have harmed national security? Those are the questions that have been sitting behind the seal. This is why sealed files matter. Sealed files do not usually contain just a boring inventory. They often contain analysis. They contain conclusions. They contain evidence about what people knew when they knew it and what they did anyway. They can contain the prosecution's theory of the case. They can contain how investigators connected facts. And that is why opening them can change everything overnight. Here's the part most people miss. When you unseal files connected to a classified documents investigation, you're not just releasing documents themselves. You are releasing how the government interpreted those documents. You're releasing the argument about whether crimes were committed. You're releasing evidence about intent and motive. You are releasing the links between people and events. You are releasing the logic that ties actions together across time. That is why this explodes. Because once those links are visible, you do not just get one controversy. You get threads that lead outward. And that is why you are hearing the story immediately connect outward. People are talking about how this could tie into the January 6th investigations. People are talking about coordination allegations. People are talking about how unsealed evidence can reveal relationships between different investigations that used to appear separate. When sealed material becomes public, it can show how timelines line up, how decisions line up, how different actions might have been part of one broader story. That possibility alone is enough to make Congress react like the building is on fire. Think about it logically. If this were simply about some papers sitting in a storage room, would you see members of Congress talking about arrests within a day? No, that would be bizarre. Congress does not go into emergency mode over filing mistakes. They do not move at this speed over administrative errors. They move like this when they believe the evidence suggests deliberate wrongdoing, serious violations, and actions that cannot be brushed off as a misunderstanding. Now layer in the fact that Trump is in his second term right now. This is not some retired politician being debated from a safe distance. This is a sitting president. His administration is trying to push policy. He is trying to govern. And suddenly there is a legal and political bomb dropped in the middle of everything. Congress is forced to respond while he is still in office. That creates immediate instability because the presidency itself is now operating under a cloud that is being fed by judicial action. So what changed? For a long time, everyone was operating with partial information. Judges sealed material. The public could not see the details. The media could only speculate. Congress did not have everything in front of them in a way that could be acted on immediately. People were watching the legal system do its work behind closed doors. Then, in January 2025, the DOJ starts moving toward releasing the special counsel report to Congress. That is already a notable shift. because the Department of Justice does not always want to hand sensitive investigative material to lawmakers. They tend to guard it. They tend to control timing. They tend to avoid anything that looks like politicization. But here, the DOJ is filing paperwork tied to disclosure, and Democrats are pushing hard for it. That sets the stage. Then the judge's unsealing move hits. And that move changes the entire situation, because it is one thing for a report to be delivered in a structured way. It is another thing for sealed evidence files to be opened in a way that creates public pressure, immediate headlines, and a sense of urgency that Congress cannot ignore. It is the difference between managed release and uncontrolled exposure. That is why Raskin's comment matters. He is framing this as a test of the system. If criminality exists, the DOJ cannot sit on it. If the evidence implies serious misconduct, the government has to respond. And he is signaling that Congress is not going to accept silence. And Murkowski's comment matters in a different way. When she says sealed files cannot hide corruption, she is validating the seriousness of the moment. She is telling the public that transparency matters even when it is politically inconvenient. Again, she is not saying that unless she believes the evidence is serious enough to justify that kind of break from party instinct. So the real story is not rumor versus counter-rumor. The real story is that an official federal investigation exists, official materials exist, and a federal judge has now unsealed evidence in a way that forces the country to confront the contents. This is not a leak. This is not hearsay. This is the legal system itself opening the door. Now, does that automatically mean Trump gets convicted in a court of law? No. The legal process is slow. Evidence still has to be weighed. Arguments still happen. Courts still decide what holds up. But it does mean Trump's second term is now operating under a crisis that cannot be dismissed as purely partisan noise, because the trigger here is official evidence and judicial action. And that brings us to the big question: what happens next? Congress now has the materials. They have findings tied to Jack Smith's investigation. They have unsealed evidence in front of them. They have public pressure and public statements already escalating the stakes. That means Congress has to decide what path they are going to take. They can push for the Justice Department to act. They can refer things for potential prosecution. They can open their own investigations, call witnesses, demand testimony, and build a public record. They can escalate toward impeachment-related action. They can increase political pressure in other ways. Or they can try to do the minimum and hope the story fades. But once evidence is unsealed in public, doing nothing becomes politically dangerous. If Congress just shrugs and moves on, it looks like permission. It looks like acceptance. And that becomes a weapon in future elections and future fights about accountability. So even people who would prefer to avoid this are forced to respond in some way. That is why the bipartisan element changes everything. Modern politics is tribal. Party loyalty often overrides facts. That is the default. So when you see even a small number of Republicans talking about truth and transparency, it signals institutional anxiety. It tells the public this is not only a partisan fight, it suggests the material is compelling enough to crack the normal protective shield. And that is why this is also a governance crisis. A president can sometimes weather controversy when it stays inside one party's narrative. But when the story is fueled by official evidence and judicial unsealing, it becomes harder to contain. It becomes harder to spin. It becomes harder to shove into the background. Every press appearance becomes about it. Every negotiation becomes about it. Every major headline becomes linked to it. The oxygen gets sucked out of everything else. And the most damaging part for Trump is not only legal exposure. It is political paralysis. Scandals derail administrations not only through convictions, but through the erosion of political capital. Through allies getting nervous, through moderates seeking distance, through constant distraction that prevents momentum. That is how a presidency can be weakened even before any final legal outcome is decided. So let us be clear about why this feels unprecedented. Sealed evidence being unsealed is rare. Judges opening files tied to classified materials is rare. Congress using urgent language across party lines is rare. All three happening within days of each other is a signal that something inside those files is serious enough to override normal instincts. Now, what should you watch for next? You should watch for Congress to make concrete moves. You should watch for the DOJ response to pressure. You should watch for continued court decisions as related processes continue. And you should watch how the political landscape shifts as more people digest what was unsealed and what it implies. Because the moment the seal is broken, you cannot put it back together the way it was. You can argue about interpretation. You can argue about legal thresholds. But you cannot argue that the evidence is still hidden. The vault is open. And that changes the environment Trump is governing in. So stay locked in on what happens next. Whether it becomes hearings, referrals, investigations, or broader political consequences, the next steps will determine whether this becomes the defining crisis of Trump's second term, or whether he finds a way to contain it. Either way, The moment those sealed files were unsealed, the rules changed. And that is why Congress reacted like they had no time to waste. Now, I want to slow down and explain why the phrase sealed files matters so much here. Sealed means the court decided the public does not get access. It means journalists cannot simply report what is inside. It means lawmakers can hide behind uncertainty and say, we should not speculate. Sealing creates fog, and fog creates time. Time is what powerful people use to survive a crisis. Unsealing does the opposite. It removes fog. It removes time. It forces everyone to deal with what is actually written, what was actually argued, and what investigators actually concluded. That is why the reaction is so sharp. It is not just that Congress got angry. It is that Congress suddenly lost the ability to pretend they do not know. Once the evidence is public, the pressure becomes concrete. That is also why the DOJ move in January 2025 matters. If the Department of Justice is filing paperwork tied to releasing Jack Smith's classified documents report to Congress, that suggests they understood disclosure was coming, and they were preparing for a structured release. But a judge unsealing evidence changes the pacing. It turns a scheduled drip into a wave, and waves do not wait for anyone's messaging plan. And remember, the classified documents element has always been bigger than boxes and storage. The core questions are intent, obstruction, and what happened behind the scenes. Those are exactly the kinds of questions sealed files can answer. That is why unsealing can change a story overnight, because it can shift the public conversation from rumors to specifics. Now, when lawmakers start saying arrest, do not assume that means something happens tomorrow. Congress applies pressure and triggers processes. Congress can demand answers, hold hearings, subpoena witnesses, and refer matters to the DOJ. What the word arrest tells you is that, in the eyes of some lawmakers, the material looks serious enough that they want maximum urgency, maximum attention, and maximum accountability. And because Trump is a sitting president in 2025, it hits harder. This is not distant history. This collides with governing right now. It affects negotiations. It affects how allies behave. It affects whether lawmakers want to tie themselves to the agenda. That is how a presidency can get dragged into paralysis even before any final legal outcome is reached. The bipartisan element is the other flashing red light. In the current era, parties do not agree on reality, let alone on consequences. So when a Republican like Murkowski is willing to say out loud that sealed files cannot hide corruption and the public deserves the truth, it signals that the evidence is not easily dismissed as partisan spin. It suggests some people who would normally stay silent feel boxed in by what they read. So the big shift is simple. Before the unsealing, everything lived in shadows and procedure. After the unsealing, everything lives in daylight and momentum. That is why you are seeing this go from 0 to 100. And that is why you need to watch what happens next, because every new statement and every new move will be shaped by the same reality. The evidence is no longer locked away. And that daylight effect does not only hit Trump, it hits the entire system. It forces the DOJ to explain why it is acting or not acting. It forces Congress to show whether it is serious or just posturing. It forces the media to stop treating it like a vague controversy and start treating it like a document-driven story. That is why this moment feels different. The usual escape routes are closing. So yes, stay with me through the details, because the details are the leverage here. When the files were sealed, the narrative was whatever people wanted it to be. Now the narrative has receipts, and in Washington, receipts are what force action. That is why this is not just noise. It is a pressure test of the institutions themselves in real time, with a sitting president at the center of it. And if you are wondering why people are reacting so emotionally, it is because unsealed evidence does not feel hypothetical. It feels final. It feels like the system is telling you in black and white what it found and why it mattered. That is a different kind of political shock. That is why this story is not fading. It is accelerating in real time.
तो अस्सलाम वालेकुम जी, हम स्टार्ट करने लगे हैं शेप लेयर्स के साथ। जिस तरह मैंने आपको बताया था कि शेप लेयर्स को किस तरह हमने बनाना है और शेप लेयर्स को हम किन किन स्टाइल्स में हम बना सकते हैं। सर्कल्स हैं, रेक्टेंगल्स हैं, उसके बाद हमें काफ़ी चीज़ें मतलब एनिमेशंस के दौरान, जैसे ईमान क्या जी स्टाइल है, एलेक्स हारमोजी, तो टेक्स्ट वगैरह ऐड करने के लिए हमें काफ़ी सारी शेप्स हम यूज़ करते हैं। उसके बाद डॉटेड जो लाइंस होते हैं, एरोज़ के जो एनिमेशंस होते हैं, ये हमें बड़ी मुश्किल से, मतलब अच्छी क्वालिटी के, प्रीमियम क्वालिटी के बड़ी मुश्किल से मिलते हैं यूट्यूब से ग्रीन स्क्रीन के साथ। उनको जब मतलब एडजस्ट करते हैं तो वो उनके पिक्सल्स ख़राब होते हैं ना, उनमें हम ग्लो वगैरह ऐड नहीं कर सकते। तो यहाँ पे आफ्टर इफेक्ट में हम वो शेप्स के साथ हम एनिमेशंस बनाना सीखेंगे कि हम किस किस स्टाइल के एनिमेशंस बना सकते हैं। तो स्टार्ट हम जो आज करने लगे हैं वो एक एरो एनिमेशन से, कि हम एक एरो का एनिमेशन किस तरह से बना सकते हैं कि जो हमें एसेट्स मिलते हैं लोग पेड एसेट्स बेचते हैं तो उसके पीछे कितनी मेहनत होती है। तो आज हम एक एरो का एनिमेशन बनाना स्टार्ट करेंगे। तो आफ्टर इफेक्ट खोल लेंगे आप। न्यू कंपोजिशन में ये कंपोजिशन जो होता है, ये हम जिस मतलब टाइम लाइन पे जिस कंपोजिशन पे हम काम करना चाहते हैं उसके पिक्सल्स यहाँ से हम सेट करेंगे। अभी मैंने जो सेट किया हुआ है ये 4K रेजोल्यूशन है। इसको आप कस्टमाइज़ कर सकते हो किसी भी रेजोल्यूशन में, ठीक है। लेकिन एसेट्स बनाते वक्त या एरोज़ वगैरह बनाते वक्त बेहतर यही है कि 4K में हो ताकि वो पिक्सल्स ख़राब ना हो। यहाँ से आप फ्रेम्स इसके एडजस्ट कर सकते हैं कि कितने फ्रेम्स में आपने इसको रखना है। 60 फ्रेम बेस्ट है। तो मैंने एक एरो एनिमेशन बनाना है जिसके लिए 5 सेकंड का टाइम इनफ है। तो मैं इसको यहाँ से ओके कर दूँगा, बैकग्राउंड ब्लैक ही रहने दूँगा। ये जी आ गया। तो ये हमारा टाइमलाइन आ गया। ये सारा का सारा टाइमलाइन है। इस साइड पे जो चीज़ें हम यहाँ से ऐड करते जाएंगे वो यहाँ पे ऐड होती जाएंगी और उनके लेयर्स यहाँ पे बनते जाएंगे। तो राइट क्लिक करते हैं शेप लेयर। हम एक शेप लेयर बनाएंगे, ठीक है। उसके लिए हम राइट क्लिक करके न्यू पे जाएंगे। उसके बाद ये रखा है हमारा शेप लेयर। शेप लेयर पे आ गए हम। तो यहाँ से हम पेन टूल उठा लेते हैं। पेन टूल का ये है कि आप अपनी मर्ज़ी के साथ कोई भी ड्राइंग बना सकते हैं, किसी भी स्टाइल में एरो बना सकते हैं, ठीक है। किसी भी शेप में एरो बना सकते हैं और उसको बाद में एनिमेट कर सकते हैं। अभी आप देखेंगे कि ये सही से नहीं बन रहा, ठीक है। मैं इसको एक लाइन की सूरत में लाना चाहता हूँ लेकिन ये लाइन नहीं है, ये अजीब तरीके का बन रहा है। उसकी वजह ये है उसका यहाँ से हम फिल को कर देंगे ऑफ़। फिल पे जाके हमने इसको ऑफ़ कर दिया और यहाँ से स्ट्रोक को हम ये फर्स्ट वाले सॉलिड कलर पे लाकर ओके कर देंगे, ठीक है जी। अब लाइन की सूरत में ये हमारे पास आ गया हमारा शेप लेयर जो हमने ड्रा किया था। यहाँ से हम इसका साइज़ एडजस्ट कर सकते हैं इसकी, ये देखें तो 10 बेस्ट रहेगा। तो ये जी हमने ड्रा कर लिया एक प्रॉपर। इसको हम एक एरो बनाने लगे हैं। एरो बनाते वक्त आप इसको यहाँ से एरो नहीं लगा सकते जिस तरह आप ड्रा करते हुए बाद में यहाँ से एरो सेट कर ले, ऐसे बिल्कुल भी नहीं करना, ये बिल्कुल ख़राब हो जाएगा। तो अब इसको पहले एनिमेट करेंगे हम, ठीक है। यहाँ से ये स्टार्ट होगा और यहाँ तक आएगा। इसका स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट यहाँ होगा, एंडिंग पॉइंट यहाँ। आप ऐसे भी कर सकते हैं कि आप इसका स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट कर लें, इसको एंडिंग, लेकिन हम तरतीब से चलेंगे। तो उसके लिए यहाँ पे आके शेप लेयर पे आके ड्रॉप डाउन, ठीक है, और इसको हम ऑन कर लेंगे कंटेंट्स को। कंटेंट्स के बाद यहाँ पे ऐड करेंगे हम ट्रिम पाथ्स। ये याद रखें ट्रिम पाथ्स। इसको हम किसी भी लाइन को एनिमेट करने के लिए, किसी रेक्टेंगल को और बॉर्डर्स को, स्ट्रोक्स को एनिमेट करने के लिए ये हमें काम आएगा। इसको याद रखना है ट्रिम पाथ्स। अब जी हम ट्रिम पाथ्स पे आ गए। ये हमारा आ गया ट्रिम पाथ्स। तो यहाँ से ड्रॉप डाउन करके ये हमारा आ गया एंड अब है 100 पे, ठीक है। तो इसको जैसे ही मैं पीछे लेके जाता हूँ वो देखें लाइन भी डिक्रीज़ होना स्टार्ट हो गया है, ठीक है। लाइन भी डिक्रीज़ होना स्टार्ट हो गया। अब इसको जैसे ही मैं इंक्रीज़ करूँगा वो देखें वो भी साथ साथ इंक्रीज़ हो रहा है, ठीक है। तो अब हमने क्या लगाना है, की फ्रेम लगाना है। स्टार्ट में हम यहाँ पे इसको 0 कर देंगे और यहाँ से ये जो स्टॉप वॉच का निशान है ना, ये एनिमेशन की फ्रेम लगाने के लिए यहाँ से मैंने की फ्रेम लगा दिया फर्स्ट। अब मैं चाहता हूँ कि यहाँ तक एनिमेशन हो और ये फुल शो हो जाए, ठीक है। ये आ गया जी। अब इसको प्ले करके देखते हैं, ठीक हो क्या जी। ये प्ले हो रहा है बिल्कुल स्मूथ तरीके से। अब इसको मज़ीद भी स्मूथ हम करेंगे। तो इसमें ट्रिम पाथ का हमने एनिमेशन ऐड कर लिया। अब करना क्या है, सेकंड नंबर पे हमने इस शेप का हमने पाथ कॉपी करना है, ठीक है। कॉपी क्यों करना है वो अब आप आगे समझेंगे। पाथ में चल के यहाँ से इस पे क्लिक करके, ठीक है, यहाँ से आपने एडिट में आके कॉपी कर लेना है, ठीक है। इसके पाथ पे क्लिक करके यहाँ से आपने कॉपी कर लिया। अब जी इसको बंद कर दिया हमने। अब एक नया न्यू शेप लेयर हम क्रिएट करते हैं। अब आप देखें ना हमने एरो बनाना है लेकिन इसका जो एरो का जो सर होता है वो हेड होता है, वो नहीं है इसका। तो हम वो हेड अब बनाने लगे हैं, ठीक है। तो वो हेड बनाने के लिए हम क्या करेंगे, एक न्यू शेप लेयर, यहाँ से न्यू शेप लेयर बना लेंगे, ठीक है जी। अच्छा, अब यहाँ पेन टूल के साथ एक और साइन है स्टार टूल का। अगर ये आपके पास स्टार ना हो तो ये रेक्टेंगल होगा, ठीक है। पेन टूल के साथ यहाँ पे रेक्टेंगल होगा। तो इसको आपने प्रेस करके रखना है और नीचे आके स्टार टूल को सिलेक्ट कर लेना है। अब स्टार टूल को हमने ड्रा करना है। अब ड्रा करते वक्त ये मेरे सामने ना साइन आ रहा है ट्रायंगल का। तो जिस तरह आप इसका जो व्हील होता है ना, माउस का व्हील, उसको चेंज करेंगे, ये इसका ना ये सिरे बढ़ते जाएंगे, इसके कोने बढ़ते जाएंगे। तो मैं इसको ट्राइंगल पे ही रखूँगा। तो ट्राइंगल पे आके मैंने यहाँ पे आके मैंने इसको रोक देना है, ठीक है, इसको बना लेना है। उसके बाद अब आप ये देखें कि इसको हमने अंदर से फिल करना है, ठीक है, अंदर से फिल करना है। तो उसके लिए हम स्ट्रोक को ऑफ़ कर देंगे, नन कर दिया स्ट्रोक को, और फिल को हमने यहाँ से सॉलिड कलर कर लेना है। हमने ये इसका हेडर मतलब डिज़ाइन कर लिया। अब हमने करना क्या है कि ये जो आप पॉइंट देख रहे हैं ना, इसको बोलते हैं एंकर पॉइंट, ठीक है ना। एंकर पॉइंट इंशाल्लाह मज़ीद भी हम आगे समझेंगे। अभी सिर्फ मैं आपको इतना बताऊं कि इस एंकर पॉइंट को हमने इस शेप के सेंटर में बिल्कुल लाना है, ठीक है, ताकि जो हमने पाथ कॉपी किया है, जो पाथ हमने बनाया था, इस तरीके से जो हमने पाथ है क्रिएट किया है, ताकि उसको ये कम्प्लीटली उसको एज़ इट इज़ फॉलो करें जिस तरह हमने पाथ वो बनाया हुआ है। तो इसको, इस एंकर पॉइंट को इसके सेंटर में लाने के लिए हम प्रेस करेंगे कंट्रोल आल्ट होम, ठीक है जी। तो यहाँ से एंकर पॉइंट इसके सेंटर में आ गया बिल्कुल, ठीक है जी। कंट्रोल आल्ट और होम प्रेस करने से अब हमने जो पाथ कॉपी किया था, ठीक है, तो पोजीशन पे आके, ठीक है, पोजीशन पहले नहीं होगा आपके पास, जो हमने पाथ कॉपी किया था, तो शेप लेयर 2 पे क्लिक करके पोजीशन जैसे ही प्रेस पी जैसे ही प्रेस करेंगे तो इसका पोजीशन आ जाएगा। तो हमने जो पाथ कॉपी किया था यहाँ से, ठीक है, ये जो पाथ हमने कॉपी किया था यहाँ से, तो उस पाथ को हमने पोजीशन पे आके कंट्रोल वी कर देना है, ठीक है जी। क्या कर दिया हमने? कंट्रोल वी कर दिया। कंट्रोल वी करने से क्या हुआ, अब मैं इसको प्ले करके देखता हूँ, ये देखें, ठीक हो गया। अब ये उस लाइन के ऊपर ही ये हेडर उसका आ रहा है, हेड आ रहा है एरो का। अब इसको बराबर करने के लिए ये आप डॉट देख रहे होंगे, ये नीचे डॉट जो है, इसको मैं ड्रैग करके लाता हूँ यहाँ पे बिल्कुल। अब आप देखिए, ठीक है, तो इसको मैं इसके बिल्कुल बराबर लेके आया हूँ। तो अब ये प्रॉपरली इसके साथ एज अ हेडर चल रहा है, इसका मतलब इस लाइन के साथ लाइन के पाथ पे एज अ हेडर चल रहा है, यानी कि आगे आगे आ रहा है। लेकिन इसकी ओरिएंटेशन है जो, वो एरो की तरह नहीं है, यानी कि टेढ़ा मेढ़ा सा है। अब हमने करना क्या है, इस पे शेप लेयर 2 पे राइट क्लिक करना है और ट्रांसफॉर्म में आके हमने ऑटो ओरिएंट पे आना है, ओरिएंटेशन पे आना है, ठीक है, और ओरिएंट अलोंग पाथ को क्लिक करके ओके कर देना है, ठीक है। अब थोड़ा सा सीधा हो गया ये देखें, ठीक है, काफ़ी बेहतर है अभी पहले से, ये देखें, ये जी, ये। अब इसको मज़ीद सीधा करने के लिए हम क्या करेंगे, इस शेप लेयर 2 पे हम आर प्रेस करेंगे। आर जैसे ही प्रेस करेंगे तो ये रोटेशन इसका आ जाएगा। तो पहले को छोड़ के दूसरे में हमने क्या करना है, 90 लेके इंटर प्रेस कर देना है, ठीक है जी। जैसे ही हमने इंटर प्रेस किया और इसको बंद कर दिया, जैसे ही इंटर प्रेस किया तो ये देखें बिल्कुल लाइन सीधी, ठीक है जी, बिल्कुल सीधी तरह। अब एरो हमारा बिल्कुल स्ट्रेट हो गया। तो ये है जी एक एरो बनाने का तरीका, ठीक है। यूज़ करने के लिए तो हम मिनटों में, मतलब यहाँ से उठा के लगा दिया अपने वीडियो में। तो देखें कि आप एक एरो बनाने के लिए कितनी मतलब वो कोशिशें करनी पड़ती। तो ये जी हमारा एरो रेडी हो गया है जी, ये है तरीका एरो बनाने का। तो आज की क्लास में इतना ही कि एक एरो मतलब किस तरह से हम एक एरो बना सकते हैं। इस शेप को आप किसी भी तरीके से कर सकते हैं, मैंने थोड़ा कम्प्लेक्स कर दिया, यानी कि इसको घुमा फिरा के कर दिया। आप इसको सीधा कर सकते हैं, आप अपनी तरीके से, आपने मतलब इसकी प्रैक्टिस करनी है कि आप किस किस तरीके से इस एरो को बना सकते हो, ठीक है जी। आज के लिए इतना ही, मिलते हैं नेक्स्ट क्लास में। अल्लाह हाफ़िज़।